Those Lips, Those Eyes is the 5th episode of the 7th season of Cheers. This is, of course, directed by the wonderful James Burrows, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode and share some thoughts. Also, I apologise in advance if you can hear some low kitty rumbles. My cat is currently in between me and the laptop, and my promise to her is to never deny her love. So she's sitting between me and the laptop and purring. I don't know if the mic will pick it up, but I apologise if it does and if it becomes irritating. The episode, thankfully, is not irritating, and I say this because I don't like Eddie. I don't remember, and I'm sure I've mentioned this before, I don't remember how I felt about Eddie the first time I watched the show. But knowing what I know about the character and ultimately what happens to him, and I won't spoil any of that here, it's a very different experience watching Eddie LeBec now. But actually, I didn't mind him in this episode. It actually starts off with Rebecca asking Woody not to be disturbed. She goes into the office. Woody knocks repeatedly to the point where Rebecca actually shouts at him, and he closes the door. And after a couple of seconds, Rebecca goes over to the door, opens it, and Woody is in tears. And it's heartbreaking, but adorable at the same time. Not a bad way to start things off. Frasier then has what looks like a new briefcase, but it is actually, in his words, his new portable cellular telephone, which just watching it now makes me laugh quite a lot. And this is to get in touch with patients in a crisis, but his phone is ringing and he can't remember the combination for the lock. Carla explains that Eddie is coming over, establishing part of the main narrative. Frasier finally gets into his briefcase phone, and it's a wrong number. I think it was pretty predictable that it was going to be not a patient, but I still liked how it played out. Rebecca then gives Woody some company season tickets, and this gives us a small subplot, but with some really fantastic moments. And Cliff, Norm, and Frasier all want the extra tickets. Obviously, it's a pair of tickets. And this comes back a little later. And it honestly gave me a really amazing moment. So I'll talk about that when we get there. Eddie then arrives. And he's talking about how they signed Franzi Schrempf to the show, who was apparently a successful ice skater in the context of Cheers. And Sam demonstrates the kind of skill Franzi had by lifting his leg rather impressively to his head. I have to say, Ted Danson's flexibility definitely impresses me. And Cliff Clavin, I don't know why I said Cliff Clavin like that. That's what I wrote in my notes. Cliff then tells Carla that Franzi Schrempf actually is a man-eater, in his words, and obviously Cliff is trying to wind Carla up, telling her that Eddie is clearly going to have eyes for her, and Carla's ignoring this. It's nonsense. She then comes in. She's played by Jank, and she's a likeable character. We don't get to see too much of her in the episode, but I thought she was a pretty likeable character. And then we come back to the season tickets. I enjoyed this a lot. Frasier, Martin, no, wrong TV show. Frasier, Cliff, and Norm are doing rock, paper, scissors to see who gets the ticket, and they're arguing about this. And I have to say, the point that the rock would go straight through the paper is a very valid point that I had never considered before. So instead, Norm comes up with a plan. They have to race to the corner and back, and whoever wins gets the ticket. And before this comes out of Norm's mouth, he is already off his stool, sprinting through Cheers. And the speed is absolutely impressive, and I found it very, very entertaining. I thoroughly enjoyed that part of it. And then we have a small few other moments in Cheers at this point. We do jump around quite a lot with the different characters, but it never felt jarring, it never felt forced. It's a very quick episode. The pacing is very effective. We never spend too much time on one thing. And Rebecca tries to comfort Carla. Woody calls his mother from the briefcase. Rebecca's comforting Carla because she's having doubts about Eddie being faithful, and Sam then tries to hit on Franzi. It doesn't work. And then Norm comes in, exhausted, but he won the race. And then Cliff comes in, and then somebody has to not necessarily carry, but help drag Frasier back in, which I rather enjoyed. So that part of the episode I had a lot of fun with. Woody then realises that actually they better get a move on or they're going to miss the kickoffs. So Woody sprints out of Cheers, and Norm tries to run after him, but ends up crawling on the stairs. And I just found it to be a very fun part of the episode. We then have a brilliant exchange between Sam and Franzi. Sam says, "You ever experienced Sammy's all-American deep muscle massage?" To which Franzi replies, "You ever experienced knowing when to quit?" I like her attitude. I really like her attitude. She then asks Eddie for a lift to the hotel. And Eddie agrees, of course, and Cliff says to Carla, "Don't say I didn't warn you." And without missing a beat, Carla throws a drink in Cliff's face, which I rather liked as well. Very well executed. And then we cut to Cliff a little while later, coming back in to Cheers, and he has this brilliant exchange with Rebecca. It's all very one-sided, but the comedy definitely comes from Rebecca, because Cliff is asking her if he could maybe get some company tickets for himself, and she says no, and he asks if it's only for company employees. She says no. He asks a couple more questions, and basically over the course of about a minute, all Rebecca says is no, 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 yes. And I have to say, that's probably the most entertaining conversation we've had between Cliff and Rebecca, and I rather enjoyed it a lot. Sam is complaining about Franzi, Carla's getting stressed about Eddie, and then Sam is on the phone to Franzi, and she reveals to him that she's fallen for somebody in the ice show. Cliff then reads something about this in the paper, and obviously Carla immediately thinks that this is Eddie. And Eddie comes in at that time, probably the worst time for him to come into the bar, and Carla pounces on him. Obviously, a brilliant performance from Rhea Perlman. Her movement was just absolutely brilliant. And Sam did a good thing, but then he said a series of bad things. He initially told Carla, "You can't just attack him like that. You've got no evidence that he is the person with whom Franzi is in love." And of course, the person Franzi is seeing. And I thought, that's sensible. That's a very good way of looking at it. There is no evidence that Eddie has done anything wrong. And then Sam said a few things that I didn't like, and it really irritated me. But then Woody swooped in with something that made me laugh out loud quite a lot. So all's well that ends well. But Sam said to her, "If he was a little tempted, maybe you pushed him into it." No, Sam, you cannot say that the other partner is the reason for the other partner's infidelity. Absolutely not. He then said, and it gets worse, "You gotta become the ideal woman." No, Sam. That is not true at all, and I feel like even for the 80s, that's quite a strong statement. Sam to imply that the only way Eddie would stay faithful to Carla is if she was society's example of what a perfect woman should be. And of course, Sam means somebody who dresses in a feminine manner and isn't as aggressive as Carla. And then he says to her, "You catch more flies with honey than with vinegar." Which, yes, is true. I think Carla can be abrasive. She can be very negative in her approach. So maybe she could be a little bit more pleasant. But at the same time, Eddie did fall in love with Carla, not a version of Carla Sam thinks she should try and be. And I was getting really annoyed by Sam's attitude here, but then Woody swooped in with a golden comment. After Sam said, "You can catch more flies with honey than with vinegar," Woody says, "Maybe I shouldn't be butting in here, but you can catch the most with dead squirrels." I love it. I absolutely love it. Not the idea of dead squirrels, but just, yeah, it was fantastic and definitely helped to lift things when I was starting to get really annoyed. And Carla did try to have a conversation with Eddie, and it seemed for a minute or so like actually they were having a healthy conversation about the situation, and then it just went off the rails. And then we cut to the final scene, where everybody is at Carla and Eddie's house. The guys are playing poker. Unusual to see Cliff out of uniform. It's not something that never happens, but whenever it does happen, I find my eyes always go to Cliff, because he always looks a little bit different. And Carla is also dressed very differently. She's wearing an outfit that is very atypical to what she would wear. And Sam then comes over. The guys are all there playing poker, but Sam comes over having just went to visit Franzi, and she was there with her boyfriend. And Carla realizes in that moment, if she was with her boyfriend, but Eddie is at the house, then the person she's in love with can't be Eddie. And she kind of realizes then that she was putting on this appearance and putting on this performance to try and make Eddie, I guess, love her more and be faithful to her. And she realizes she doesn't need to do that. So she sweeps everything off of the table. Everybody leaves. And the final parts of the episode are just Carla and Eddie. And I got very happy when she said, "You let me walk around like Debbie Reynolds." I can see it. I can see that with that outfit. And I'm a big fan of Debbie Reynolds. Very much in love with Debbie Reynolds. So that made me very, very happy. And Carla admitted that actually she'd lost sight of the fact that Eddie has been faithful to her. And I thought this was a really interesting moment because she admitted as well that she'd never been married to somebody who had been faithful. And in that moment, I think there is the acknowledgement that because Carla had been hurt so much in the past, let's face it, Nick Tortelli has a lot to answer for, that Carla just assumes that that's how everybody is going to treat her. And I think that this is such an eye-opening moment for Carla. And I think it applies to a lot of people. I think a lot of people can take something away from this, where if you have been in a situation where you have been hurt so much, and like many people, I talk from experience, and I'm sure a lot of people know what this feels like, not necessarily with romantic relationships, but any kind of relationship where it's so easy to just automatically assume that that's how you're going to be treated by everybody for the rest of your life. And maybe that's why Carla has such a guard up in front of her all of the time, because she's so used to people hurting her. Granted, I feel like Carla's maybe been this way her whole life, but she's so used to people hurting her that she gets there first. She doesn't give them the chance to do that. And I feel like maybe that's why Carla was so willing to jump to the conclusion that Eddie had cheated on her, because if she got to that conclusion before she found out that it was the truth, were it the truth, she had the upper hand there. She was prepared in that situation, rather than finding out without warning and feeling the pain that came with that without preparation. And I think it's a really brilliant moment for Carla. And as much as I don't like Eddie, but again, I don't know how I felt about him at this time. The first time I watched the show, but I really admired him when Carla said she's going to try and be the perfect wife. And Eddie tells her, "I don't want you to be the perfect wife." He just wants her to be the woman he married, the woman he fell in love with. And I really respected his words there. I think there was a lot of goodness in there. And honestly, Eddie seems like a decent guy. But knowing what we know about future episodes, it's hard to watch the character. It's not the character's fault, of course. More on that when we get there. But for now, I can say those lips, those eyes, is a really solid episode of Cheers. Personal highlights, Sam lifting his foot up to his head, I rather enjoyed. Norm sprinting across Cheers, and Woody's line about the dead squirrels, but also just Carla's journey as a character in this episode, I think was really brilliant, very well done, a lot of value here, and of course a brilliant performance from Rhea Perlman. Oh, and the Debbie Reynolds mention obviously made me very happy. All things considered, as much as Eddie LeBec is not the easiest character to watch, those lips, those eyes is a really brilliant episode of Cheers.